Good afternoon and welcome to the Counselling Skills for Human Connection webinar. My name is Danica and I will be your host this afternoon. With us today, we have Dr. Nolene Loubser, who has a PhD in psychology and lives in Pietermaritzburg with over 40 years of experience. Nolene initially qualified as a social worker at the then University of Natal, followed by her honors and master's degrees in experimental cognitive psychology. She then read for a PhD at the University of the Witwatersrand. Nolene is currently a research supervisor, educator, and micro-assessor at SACAP. And now, without any further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Nolene. Thank you so much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And to Danica, thank you very much for that very warm welcome. It's nice to have all of you here today. And the purpose of this webinar is the following four objectives. Firstly, to understand the core principles of effective counseling skills, and then to demonstrate active listening and empathetic responding, and then to help you apply questioning techniques to deepen your conversations, and to help you recognize and manage common communication barriers. And finally, to build stronger and more authentic connections in everyday interactions. Now, before we go on, I just want to give a disclaimer. I am not currently registered in any professional way to do counseling. I had previous registrations, but I'm not in practice at the moment. And I just want to make it very clear that this webinar is going to focus on skills that may be used by professional counselors, but it is not intended to be a counseling session or to train for counseling. So the session is not in any way intended to be used for training in counseling or to be construed as a counseling session. What I want you to do now, everyone please, is I just want you to think about some social interactions that we have. I want you to picture a scene. Maybe it's your dinner table, maybe it's out at a restaurant, maybe it's not you, maybe it's another couple, somebody out dating. And when you look at people seated around a table, wherever they be seated, what do you notice? What is the common object there? Just think about it. And I'm sure that you would have been able to identify that it is the cell phone. And I'm pretty sure, yes, I'm getting the responses in the chat box as well. Cell phones, here, there, and everywhere. We've all got our cell phones. And I'm guessing probably that a lot of us, even here in this webinar, are sitting watching a computer session, and we have a cell phone next to us. And as a disclaimer, I do have my cell phone next to me, but it's because I need to keep in touch with tech in case anything goes wrong behind the scene. Okay, of course, you can be watching this on your cell phone too. All right, so we have this scenario that we are very much more connected. Our cell phones enable us to connect so much more easily than 20, 30 years ago, where we didn't have this form of communication. And yet, with this greater communication that has been enhanced by all kinds of technology, whether it's cell phones, computers, or whatever, we're living in a world where we are a lot less connected. People are together, but not together. Your eyes are on your phones. I notice this even in my family. I now have a rule that when we eat a meal, the cell phone can be there, but must be face down and ignored, at least while eating. Try to keep the cell phone out of the way and at least try to communicate. So we're often together, but our eyes are on our phones. We're not really connected with each other. And there was this joke about, I'm having a few friends around for dinner while we catch up on our cell phones. Would you like to join us? And that is really what our life has become, connected but disconnected. So this is what we want to tackle in this webinar today, is how to become a little more connected. Okay, we need to be connected. As people, we want this connection with each other. Our connection needs are that we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be understood. We want to be just noticed. We want to know that we're important, that we matter. And the way to do this is to be able to communicate more effectively with each other. And effective communication is going to come down to effective listening, that we can listen to people and those people feel that they are seen. We can hear them and they know that they are heard. And once we get the message, they also know that they are understood. And this brings us to what is called emotional intelligence. Now, our intelligence in everyday life, we all think of somebody as being intelligent or brainy or bright. And we think of this intelligence in terms of how we perform on tasks. And these tasks are usually related to school tasks, like a maths buff, someone who's good at maths, or someone who's good at reading or writing. And we look at these and we say that person is intelligent. But intelligent is not only to do with these kind of processes, to do with learning and performing in the world. There's another kind of intelligence as well. And this is what we call emotional intelligence. And just like we talk about intelligence as our IQ or intelligence quotient, when we talk about emotional intelligence, we refer to it as our EQ, our emotional intelligence quotient. And we need to have a high level of emotional intelligence in our communication for our listening and communication to be effective. So we talk about psychological safety. Can people be real with you? Can they talk to you without you judging them? So if they have something to say, can they say it and you're just going to accept it? And I'm going to speak from some personal experiences here, just to illustrate this. Like, let's say, and this goes back a while, that there were security issues in a place I lived previously, and I'd had another security issue that had cropped up. And somebody could say to me, well, you choose to live there, you know. That is judging. That's not giving me a sense of safety about my life choices. So people need to know that they can talk to you and you're not going to judge what they're saying. Sometimes it takes a while for people to get to the point. Sometimes they need a lot more words and lot more space. And they don't need you to rush them to say, well, what's the point? What are you trying to say? We just need to be able to pace ourselves and work at the pace at which they're going to share this information. And your job there is more to listen than to try to fix. And so often, when people want to talk about their problems, we want to jump in and fix. I do work with training counselors, and this is one of the most difficult things some of my counseling students find is they really want to fix. They want to have a result. They want to show that their counseling has been successful, that they have been able to fix something for someone. So when you're listening, it's very hard to resist that urge to fix because we want a solution, we want to help, we want to feel useful. So what emotional intelligence boils down to is noticing someone, understanding someone, and responding appropriately. And that is what people are looking for if they're wanting us to really hear what they are saying. Okay, so listening then is not a passive process. It's not just detecting sound. When we were preparing for this webinar, when we were checking our mics and everything, we were saying, like, can you hear me? The message we were saying to each other as we were setting up today for this webinar is when we're saying, can you hear me? Is just confirm that you can detect the sound I am making. That's not listening, really. That's just detecting the sound. Listening is far more than this. It's an active process. It involves attention to notice what somebody is saying and to attribute some meaning to what they are saying as well. You may be in a serious situation and you need to understand how serious it is. Maybe somebody is telling a joke, then your attending and understanding needs to focus more on the humor of the situation. You need to hear that it is a joke. So, how do we show our active listening? We do it in many different ways. Essentially, we have to be present because our attention is the skill. Paying attention to someone, not letting anything else interrupt what is going on with them. And we do this by showing eye contact. So we are looking at the person that we are listening to. And we're not trying to do a whole lot of other things. So we're not like on our phone as well and saying yes to the person and then going back to our phone and yes to the person. We're not leaning to the side and trying to do something else and being distracted while we're trying to talk to that person. We're actually focused. We're there. We're not trying to multitask. They really have pretty much our undivided attention when we're listening to them. And you can also show someone that you're listening to them by giving small signals. If you're talking to me and I'm just staring at you, you've got no idea that I'm actually listening to what you're saying. But if you're talking to me and I'm going, I'm nodding, I could say, mm. Some people call it my grunting noise, but I'm acknowledging that you're saying something, I'm hearing it. And sometimes I might just sort of say yes, and carry on. The short responses are signals. They show you listening, that you're listening. And they're the small signs that matter. And they show you listening far more than when you just might just be doing something to the side and you say, now talk, I'm listening to you, but you're not actually paying full attention. You are doing something else. Okay, and then your body language. Are you giving an open pose? Are you kind of like this, a very closed pose that's putting a barrier, like I'm not really listening, but just carry on? You need to also understand your body language, be open, be full front on to people that you are talking to. Now I'm going to illustrate something about our poses and how we can listen and the kind of feedback we can give. And I'm going to cite an example that happened a few weeks ago. At the time I was actually preparing for this webinar. I'm in Pietermaritzburg, and Pietermaritzburg was hit by a tornado. It was my first ever experience of a tornado, but we had the weather tornado and a whole lot of other metaphorical tornadoes happen at that same time on that weekend. It was really like quite an action-filled weekend for me. So I'm talking about what happened. There was tornado damage to my house. My tiles got disturbed on my roof. I had a massive leak into my house. I had 2 ceilings come down in my house. At the same time, over that long weekend, there were 3 break-ins to my house. And there was damage. Stuff was taken. When somebody came to start helping with the repairs, my cat took fright and vanished. It actually went to hide away to be safe somewhere else. So I had a missing cat to deal with on top of everything else. And then just to top it all, there was a sick child to have to deal with as well. Child wasn't feeling well. Now, if I'm telling you this, how could you respond to this? You could say something which is a typical South African expression, "Oh, shame." It covers a multitude of situations. It can be pity. It can be an expression of affection, like if you see a cute little kitten, "Oh, shame," isn't it cute? But the "oh, shame, you poor thing." is really a very superficial response. It's showing a little bit of concern, maybe, but it's just saying, oh, shame, you poor thing, out there. You could have a slightly deeper response and say, oh, that's hectic. And I know I tend to describe that weekend as it was one hectic weekend. But if to make me really, really feel heard and listened to, you could identify the feeling behind that by saying something like, it sounds like you're feeling quite overwhelmed, or that really is a lot to deal with all at once, which gives a much deeper flavor of response because it means you're connecting with me and my message and the emotion in the message as well, which is where the emotional um, intelligence comes to play. So, what you can do instead is engage in what we call reflective listening. If you don't know what to say, you could just paraphrase. You could say it back simply and just identify the feelings. So, and an appropriate response could be, so you're feeling quite overwhelmed. It sounds like this whole thing is quite overwhelming. So you're moving deeper into the response and you're showing that you've really heard and connected with the person who's telling you what is going on. And this brings us to the difference between empathy and sympathy. I'm going to start with sympathy, which is on the right on your screen, which talks about feeling for someone, which is the response of that was hectic or oh shame. You're feeling for someone, you're showing some kind of act of pity, but you're not showing any part in it. So sympathy is an understanding of another person's suffering, which is often accompanied by pity or by sorrow, but without experiencing the same emotions. And in contrast, we have something called empathy, which is not feeling for like sympathy, but feeling with, which is a much deeper, emotional, and often vicarious experience of sharing another's emotional state. It involves putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And there is a cartoon which shows the difference very nicely between sympathy and empathy. I want you to picture someone who's fallen into a hole and they're trapped in the hole and they're sitting in the hole and they don't know what to do. So they're buried like quite deep inside this hole. Sympathy would be someone standing outside this hole and saying to the person in the hole, I'm really sorry that this has happened. I'm sorry that you're in this mess. So they're expressing some kind of pity about that person's state. Empathy would be that you jump into that hole and you sit next to that person and you say, like, tell me how you're feeling. That is the difference. And when we try to communicate effectively and have listening, that is listening with connection, the secret is to develop the empathy, to be able to feel with the person as you're listening to what they're saying. Okay, so what does empathy do? Empathy is a validation of the other person. So empathy is a move to understand that other person, not to fix them, not to solve the problem, just to understand them. So with empathy, we understand someone first, and we can validate their feelings, and then helping, if we're going to give any kind of help, is going to come later. We're not going to try to fix, we're not going to try to give advice, we're not going to try to tell them what to do. We're just understanding and validating where someone is coming from, and then we can move into helping at a later stage. And we're helping to make sense of the situation. We can say something like, that sounds really tough. Or I get why you'd feel that way. We're showing an understanding, an awareness, a being with. that person. And that is why empathy is so important when we try to listen to each other. Okay, part of what we're doing when we are trying to listen to someone and to listen effectively is we might ask questions for greater clarity or for more information. And there are two broad classes of questioning that we can use. There are the short answers, which are closed questions, and then there are the deeper thinking answers, which we call open questions. I want you to think how often we just sort of say, like, hello, how are you? And you're expecting someone just to say, fine, and you move on. And that is a closed question. There's no depth. And I always think back to someone I knew when I was a child, and we would just say, don't ever ask that one how they're feeling, because they will tell you. And they meant business. You got a long, much deeper answer from saying, how are you? But your short answers, your closed questions are your yes, no questions, like, are you okay? Versus, how are you feeling? Which would be an open question. And the examples I've given here, again, this are you okay? Versus what's been going on. Your open questions go beyond your yes and no. You're not asking a question where you're just going to get what we call monosyllabic answers, which are usually your yes, no, fine, whatever type of answers. You can make it a question open very easily, but instead of saying, getting a yes, no, you can say, like, what's been going on? Then a person cannot just say yes or no. Or you can say, how did that affect you? Which encourages exploration at a greater depth. Okay, so what I want you to do is take a break from listening to me, and I want you just to have a brief moment of self-reflection. Think of a recent conversation, and I want you to think, did you really listen to what was being said to you, or what could you do differently? And I'm going to give you, as an example, just to set off your reflection, an example that just came out of a class I was teaching yesterday. We were doing all the usual things that we had to do around the area that I was teaching in. And then I needed to write a reference for a student. And I just asked, while we were just filling in the gaps or something, I just said to this, mentioned something about the student's reference. And we got onto talking about where my students were going to go when they have finished their studies with me at SACAP. And it got onto applications and how to apply and where to apply, and then what the career aspirations were doing. And a close question would have focused just on, like, are you going to do a master's degree? And that would have been yes, no, and the session could have ended there. And something happened that my students started expanding on what kind of a master's they were going to do and why and where they wanted to do it and what their career plans were. And suddenly we got from the closed session into a very open discussion. It was actually a really lovely class because although we were talking about nothing that had to do with my teaching material, we got the depth of open questions and moving on. And I want you now just to self-reflect and think of a recent conversation. I want you to think, did you really listen? Or were you just going, uh-huh, 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 while actually trying to focus on something else? Or were you just trying to wish that conversation over quickly so you could get on or say your own thing? Did you really listen? Or could you do something differently? So I'm just going to give you a short time to just reflect and think about this because I'm going to ask you some questions about this as we carry on. So just think about this conversation and then I'll move on to my next slide. Okay. When I'm saying something like somebody just saying, but not really paying attention, and I've asked you to think about your conversations and think what you could have done differently, you might have detected that something happened in that conversation that made it not go as perfectly as you would have liked it to go. And that is where we talk about barriers and how do we manage barriers to communication. Now, the common barriers or the common traps in our communication are going to be interrupting. And I'm sure all of you can think how easy it is to interrupt. And even though when I'm working professionally as a counselor and I do have to listen, whatever, certainly in everyday life, I don't carry those skills forward always and all the time. I'm sure we can all agree that we interrupt sometime because we just really got to say that we don't want to hear someone out. We just want to get our chance to say. Or we're judging. I've mentioned judging before. So someone's talking and what you're thinking, well, you got yourself into that mess. Really, you should get yourself out of that mess. That thought is going on in your head while they're talking. I'm sure we're all guilty of this one as well. Or fixing too fast. You hear it, you think you know the perfect solution, you know it, you want to just jump in and fix it. And you want to fix it immediately. End of conversation. Let's move on. The solution's easy. I know all the answers. Let me tell you what to do, and we carry on. And the same thing could be advising. Well, if I was you, I would. Quickly wanting to give advice, not helping someone to make their own decisions. So we want to do the advising very quickly. I'm seeing questions coming up in the chat. I'm going to deal with questions in the Q&A at the end. So I'd like to ask you, if you're putting questions in the chat, to please put them into Q&A. And then right at the end, Danica is going to open up the Q&A, and then we will deal with the questions then rather than in the middle of the webinar. Okay. And I will attend to the chat later on as well. Okay. And then the other trap we have is waiting to talk. You're standing there wanting to, please hurry up, please finish what you're saying because I've got something to say. So you're only waiting to talk. You're not really listening to what they are saying. So what essentially you need to do with these barriers is to slow down. We've all heard that. Slow down and smell the roses. Don't be in such a hurry to get through the conversation. Be there, be present. Paraphrase what you hear to make sure that you're hearing it right. In other words, say back to the person what you've heard them say in their own words. Like if I give you my tornado example again, a paraphrase could be, there were lots of hectic things going on this weekend, like the tornado and its damage, as well as the break-ins. Never mind worrying about your kitty and your child. That is a paraphrase, and it's getting back that you've understood the meaning and reflecting what is said. And the reflection there is, that must be quite overwhelming because it gives the reflection, it makes the person feel heard. Okay. So what we're going to do as part of your reflection now is to move on. Again, I want you to think of one person that you're going to talk to today. And it doesn't have to be a high-powered conversation. It could just be talking to someone when you get home from work or they come home from work. It could be talking to someone you meet walking past them somewhere. It could be at home, at work. It can be anywhere. And in that conversation, remember what you identified as your barriers. Think about one of these things. Maybe don't interrupt them if that's your big barrier. See if you can practice letting them finish this time. See if you can reflect what you hear them saying, and think maybe of one open question to ask them. So we're not talking huge, big techniques. As I said, we're not training you for counselors. We're just training you in some of the listening skills we use. And so this is it. It's not a big technique. It's just one small shift. Okay. Now, if you want to, you can put in the chat. I will look at the chat as my presentation finishes. But I want you to think of what you do, what makes a barrier for you when you are listening to someone. And you can put these in the chat. As I say, I will get to them later. But is your inclination being that you want to fix up something right away? If somebody comes to you and they've got an issue, they've got a problem, something's wrong. Is your inclination there that you want to fix it? It's got to be solved, you've got to move on. Is your inclination to interrupt because you already know you can see the whole picture? You don't really need to listen to the whole story to know what's going on. So you really want to interrupt them and just get to the point. Or another one, and I'm sure we're all guilty of this, and I notice it happens a lot in classes as well, especially when people's attention spans drift a bit. Do you drift off or find yourself somewhere else? Does one need to say something suddenly to wake you up? Sometimes in my classes, I have to say to my students, when I do have them all on screen when I'm teaching, I look at my classes, and then if I notice somebody's perhaps losing the plot, I have to ask them a question just to get them back. But you get distracted if you're standing around having a discussion. If you're not really that interested in what somebody's saying, if they're taking a long time to get to the point, you don't want to interrupt, but you're drifting off. You're thinking about something else. They're telling you something, but you're thinking, what shall I cook for supper? Did I remember to take it out of the freezer? Drifting off and not being totally there. If someone's talking to you and your phone buzzes, are you more intent on looking at what's at your phone? So what I want you to do is think of what happens, what makes a barrier for you. And then because our cell phones are such a big distraction, like I've noticed I forgot to silence my phone before this presentation, which I had actually intended to do. It's been beeping away as I've been talking. And I keep on getting distracted by, I didn't silence my phone. Should I quickly take a second out to go and silence it? But I know it's going to be a distraction from my course. And every time it beeps, it does distract me. So my other question to you, and you can also put these answers in the chat, is how can you disconnect from your cell phone and really connect with people? I've said one thing that I institute when we're having meals is I insist that cell phones they can be there, but they must be face down and ignored for the time we are busy. But perhaps you do need to put your phone on silent. Perhaps you do just need to ignore it if it beeps and be disconnected and not feel like you really have to look at it right there and then. If you're going out somewhere, that it needs to be switched off. I did see that somebody suggested leaving it at home. That is possible, but so many of us rely on it for security, for getting transport, for being able to have people know where we are. But we need to think of how we can disconnect from our cell phone when we want to connect with people. When I was actually working actively as a counselor, if my clients came in for counseling sessions, I used to actually insist that their cell phones are switched off so we could focus on the class at hand. When I was teaching at brick and mortar universities, when students came to class, I would insist that their cell phones were switched off, and there were huge, huge penalties for cell phone use and cell phones going off in class. Students resented me for it for the first few weeks, and then they noticed they were actually getting on with their classwork. What I did as a compromise was I would do half the class, and then we'd have a break, and it would be a cell phone break, and I'd say, okay, guys, quickly switch on your phones, update your Facebooks, whatever they wanted to do, and I'd give them a few minutes to look at their phones, And it was also a break because the attention span would be going after about 20, 25 minutes. And then it's like, okay, phone's off, let's carry on. And eventually at the end of my course, I got feedback about how much they'd resented it until they saw how much it aided their working. So there are many, I'm seeing many suggestions coming through in the chat. Putting it on silent, not having it with you at all, banning it, having downtime, all of these suggestions. So really you need to think of how you can stop your greatest connection becoming your greatest sense of disconnection. Okay, put on do not disturb. Okay, there are many ways, but what I'm seeing here is that you have lots of ideas, which is good, which means that you can get your connection back. Okay, so how do we integrate all of these listening skills? We need to listen fully to what someone is saying, be fully attentive and focused. We need to reflect back what they're saying. If we're going to ask questions, it must be an open question, not a closed question. Although obviously there is a time and a place for closed questions as well. Like, are you coming home for supper or are you going to be late? There's room for a question like that, but there's a lot more room for open questions. And so to finish off, we are more connected than ever right now. But somehow, in this great area of connection through technology, we are also far more disconnected from each other. What most people really want isn't more messages or more advice. It is rather to feel heard, to feel understood. And this is going to start with something very simple, how we listen to someone else. Because good listening is being present, showing understanding, and asking people, not telling them. Because at the end of the day, people are going to remember how you made them feel. And your communication and your listening to someone else should be listening with the heart and not only with the head. And that is the end of my presentation. And before we carry on, I'm just going to use this opportunity just to talk a little bit about SACAP before we go into the question and answers. As was mentioned in the introduction, I teach at SACAP. I do research supervision at SACAP, and I also work in global, which is where you are. And Danica is going to talk about the global courses. The two that I'm involved in there are the fundamental counseling skills, which is the top left on your screen, and the deepening your counseling skills, which is fourth along, which talk more about how we develop these listening skills. And these are short 6 to 8 week courses. And then if you want to go more serious to the more advanced levels, we offer diploma and degree courses. And the course is then offered by SACAP as fundamentals of a helping relationship, where you get a lot more training in more of a counseling role, where you help you develop your helping relationships.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nolene. That was absolutely wonderful. So SACAP Global offers a range of online short courses, micro-credentials, and workshops. Micro-credentials are bite-sized interactive courses that have set date. Please do follow us on our various social media channels to stay up to date on our upcoming events, program launches, and updates, and to see the recording to this webinar. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Nolene Loubser and to all of our attendees for joining this afternoon, and we hope you have a lovely day further. Thank you so much.